Just say no. Just say no.
Just say no. Just say no.
I think about these two versions of a transformed humanity I've looked at in the last few months. Bob's view that people can make this transition on their own through techniques and realization, and Frank's view that LSD is the key that can throw the door open for everyone. Bob's completely unfounded views are just a load of what Brett called happy bullshit, meant to calm spiritual stirrings and maybe turn a buck and strike a pose while doing it. Frank started with a utopian ideal based on Buck's book and did the courageous thing by following the facts wherever they led. Bob's idea is juvenile nonsense, and Frank's idea is at least plausible in theory. But what they have in common is that neither will ever come to pass. And it's not really desirable that they should. It's natural that we should want something better, but it doesn't necessarily follow that we know what that would be, or that we should have it. That was the objective: free and easy access for everyone. Free and easy inner access for everyone. It's very tricky to take a pro-drug position in this day and age, especially if the drug is as effectively demonized as acid, though technically I believe it's an agent, not a drug. Acid. Christ, I can't believe we're even talking about this. That's the kind of reaction he meant. He wasn't aware of any problem with LSD. He thought it was all good. Is it? I haven't found a problem. I wouldn't care if I did. That if I were the guy in charge of making this dream come true, I'd accept a very high casualty level. Just as if I were doing it for my own liberation, I'd be very risk tolerant. Very. It's all just hypothetical, though. The actual downside appears to be negligible. His ideas were pretty well developed. He used that particular phrasing to define a standard. He wasn't talking about a hippie renaissance or renewed government testing or more university studies. He was talking about unrestricted access to normally unavailable dimensions of selfhood, and the criteria he settled on as a clear standard was free and easy access for everyone. LSD happens to meet that standard, and nothing else does. It's clever in that it's very exclusionary. It excludes a lot of other drugs and agents and analogs. It also excludes other methods for achieving expanded states. For instance, there are Zen masters and meditation experts and spiritual gurus who claim that LSD is artificial, and that their proprietary methods are the only true and real and lasting forms of inner access. Something like that. I wouldn't presume to speak for their experiences, but I would say that they had their chance. In my opinion, free and easy access for everyone renders all religions and philosophies and spiritual teachings instantly obsolete and irrelevant, and good riddance. It puts them out of a game they were never really in. If chemical mysticism means you can drag any bum in off the street after breakfast and have him experiencing a full-blown state of God consciousness before lunch, then the rules have changed. The methods of access they're defending require decades of devotion, dedication, and privation, with no serious likelihood of success. Would you want to jump into a rowboat and start paddling across the Atlantic despite terrible hardship and struggle and the near certainty of failure? Or jump on a plane and be in Paris tonight? Anyway, by defining the standard, as free and easy access for everyone. When you put it that way, you instantly sweep everyone else off the table. It doesn't leave room for discussion or debate. What about the harmful effects you hear about? Of LSD? Neither of us were aware of any worth mentioning. Plenty of anecdotal reports, scare tactics, problems with disturbed or unbalanced people, with irresponsible usage, with use in non-conducive settings. There's no doubt we're talking about a very powerful substance, capable of completely revolutionizing someone's understanding of reality in a few hours. It's probably prudent to approach it with some respect. Listen, I'm not an LSD expert or advocate. That's not my thing at all. But I'll say this. Of the many hours I spent in library, much of it was focused on the anti-LSD material, and I was very unimpressed. I have a very good nose for bullshit, and the anti-LSD material reeked of it. So you can look into it for yourself if you're interested. But I don't think you'll find much in the way of a downside to responsible LSD use, except bad trips. But they can be pretty awful, can't they? I guess so. But that seems more a factor of your own internal environment, and not the agent that got you there. You can't blame the key if you don't like what's on the other side of the door. Just to be clear, he wasn't talking about escapism in the way that drugs are used in the West. He was talking about reclaiming our sacred heritage. It's a little funny. In 1984, it talks about a society of peace, brotherhood, equality that could have been created, but wasn't. The earthly paradise had been discredited at exactly the moment when it became realizable. An earthly paradise was his vision, and it was discredited exactly at the moment when it became realizable. It's interesting to note that Bob's views will probably be well received, and that Frank's balanced and heavily documented views would have caused him to be scorned out of his career and ostracized by society. Go Maya. He wanted to construct some sort of quasi-academic document that would turn the world on its head. I don't need to be convinced, and I'm really not that interested. What's interesting to me is how quickly and effectively that door got slammed shut. That's Maya at work. That's what interests me. The raw power and cunning of fear. I'm not writing a book about how great expanded awareness is. There are plenty of those. I want to look at how great the enemy of awakening is. It's interesting to observe Maya in people, in ego, but it's been a real education to isolate and observe Maya's reaction to this very potent threat to her dominion. Not thousands of years ago, in a foreign land when no one wrote anything down and you have to try to unravel an absurd mythology. But a few years ago, right here, and documented from every angle to the nth degree. It's been like this specialized branch of anthropology that focuses on understanding the ego and its fascinating talent for self-preservation. Fun for me, and good for the third book. But what I found in all this is that there were hundreds of so-called visionaries in this period, the 60s. They were mostly very small-thinking and short-sighted. I don't think it would have been well received by the world, but that would be a reflection on the world. And I talked about this sort of transcending into homelessness with regard to LSD and kids in the 60s. How are you going to keep them down on the farm after they've seen God? After they've been God. Suddenly, people are being rocketed out of their mundane realities into phantasmagorical realms of hyper-awareness, setting themselves, in the process, adrift. Where do I go from here? Many must have asked themselves in quiet moments. I've destroyed one world, so now what? Obviously, I don't go back to school to become an accountant or an engineer or a lawyer now that I know, beyond any possibility of doubt, that what my parents call life is just cheap shadow play. So where do I go? They needed some understanding of this new level of reality they found themselves in, some framework within which to take refuge and assimilate their transpersonal, transhuman, trans-everything experiences. And they weren't finding any manuals of higher consciousness on Mom and Dad's bookshelves. They were catapulted so far beyond the paradigm of their parents that they were like a new and unprecedented order of beings. Leary's admonition to turn on, tune in, and drop out was fine as far as it went, which was exactly nowhere. Dropping out was the easy part. The hard part is that when you drop out of one thing, you have to drop into another. And there was no other thing. City parks and crash pads and Volkswagen buses do not make for an inhabitable paradigm. A new social strata of indigent mystics and sidewalk gurus was certain to not long endure. "It's a completely unique event in our history," said Frank. "Where else can you see anything remotely close in the annals of human consciousness? The genie got out of the bottle, and for a little while free and easy access for everyone was a reality. Not for long, but it was there. An emerging new religion with an authentic sacrament instead of a symbolic sacrament. But then the genie got crammed back into the bottle, and the bottle was labeled poison and buried so deep it might be many generations before it's seen again." One of the questions Frank and I played with was, where are they now? Now we're looking back at the whole thing from the perspective of time. Where did they all go? Back to the farm, we concluded. Where else? They had to break back into the cuckoo's nest, reintegrate themselves into the combine, reassimilate themselves with the herd. Like Cypher, the traitor in the Matrix, they had to weasel their ways back in and make arrangements for their memories. Frank talked to me for 2 hours one night about memory and about how we are all historical revisionists in our own heads. I remember that at the time it sounded like the mutability of the past Big Brother was able to impose on the citizens of Oceania. Maybe Maya has the same thing, I remember thinking. Or maybe I only think I remember thinking it. Not all the godlings underwent repatriation. Some found comfort and community in smaller satellite herds loosely united under the catch-all New Age banner. But that's just a petty vanity. All sheep in herd orbit, no matter how far out, are still part of the herd. Maya is the Good Shepherd, and few, if any, head were lost. So here we are, said Frank, 4 decades later, looking back on it. And what do we see? A few signs of impact in the old world, a few secondary revolutions, feminist, sexual, racial. But no new world ever sprang up out of it. It never took root. It never had a chance. Buck and Frank were both a bit goofy in their own ways. Buck envisioned a future of socialism, personal aircraft, the end of cities, and eventually, a race of morally superior people possessed of the cosmic sense, which he expected to develop in man over time, like color perception, becoming a race-wide faculty over a few thousand years. Buck was a friend and admirer of Whitman, but never went further than that. He never most honored Whitman's style. He most honors my style who learns under it to destroy the teacher. That's the finger pointing at the moon thing. Buck couldn't honor Whitman's style that way. He could only praise and admire the finger. Whitman was saying to the reader, to Buck, to us, this is your journey. Not I, not anyone else can travel that road for you. You must travel it for yourself. Neither Buck nor Frank ever traveled that road. They both stopped. They both dug in and became self-appointed spokesmen for a journey they never took, making optimistic guesses and extrapolating futures they would never see. Were either of them right? I don't know. Ask me again in a few thousand years. Although neither of them knew it, the question they were trying to answer boils down to this. Can fear be replaced as the binding agent that holds the dream state together? Is there another core emotion of sufficient intensity to keep this whole thing lit up? And both these men, in their different ways, and without really understanding the question, said yes. Me, I don't think so. I know Maya pretty well, and I don't see her ever losing more than the occasional stray. A species-wide transformation is a pretty idea, but we have little cause for optimism and plenty for pessimism. It's nice to think we could elevate ourselves, and it's fun to dabble in theoretical scenarios. But the reality is that man will never evolve or transcend or develop beyond his past and present level. If that sounds like a bad thing to us, if Maya sounds like a force of evil, if the terms by which man lives on this planet seem too oppressive or restrictive, then we might do well to take a step back and reevaluate the situation. Where are we? What is this place? Is it a prison to be despised, or an amusement park to be explored and enjoyed? Is ego a hideous affliction, or is it simply the vehicle that allows us to come out and play? When the choice is between no self and false self starts looking pretty good, and despising and demonizing it starts to seem pretty ungrateful. Maybe there are other planes of existence, and maybe the inhabitants of those higher planes are of a more evolved, less benighted nature. Maybe this whole physical human plane is just the coarsest level of self-awareness, a kindergarten in that larger, subtler dreamscape. But that's not what Frank or Buck were talking about, and beyond the obvious mechanism of denial reasons, I don't know why anyone would care about the extended forecast anyway. Life isn't down the road in the distant mists of time. The game is afoot, here, now, on the physical human plane. Most people get through the day by believing that if they don't break too many rules, too much, they automatically get promoted up through the ranks, be it one life and straight to the top, or a climb of many smaller steps. This comes to us from Maya's ministry of deferral and procrastination, which promotes a doctrine of plausible denial and applied non-aggression, and where the motto is rock the cradle, not the boat. Lily Tomlin said the problem with being in the rat race is that even if you win, you're still a rat. To my way of thinking, the problem with being in the human race is that even if you win, you're still a human. Let's pretend for a moment that we're not, as a race, a mere tweak or two from perfection, but a cataclysmic makeover away. Let's say, for the sake of argument, that the way humanity is now is nowhere close to what it could be. That we're nowhere in the vicinity of what we might become. That we're morbidly mired at the shitty end of the potential spectrum. It certainly seems that the light of human consciousness is at its lowest possible setting and cannot be further dimmed. So at least there's cause for optimism. It can't get any worse. Maybe it just has to get a little brighter. Just a smidge. And then some positive tipping point is reached, and the whole thing lights up like day, and these dark ages are only remembered for their slow dissolving steel and concrete. Man can crawl out of the lightless tar pits of religion and spirituality the way our distant ancestors crawled out of the oceans, and some version of Frank's crazy-ass new world could evolve, populated by integrated, empathetic, sympathetic, awake, aware, whole-brained, fully conscious, open-eyed, non-fear-based humans. I doubt it. But if it ever happens, it will only happen by getting people through that door that Frank saw. And there's no doubt that, in all of known creation, the only thing that might be called the Golden Key, that might offer free and easy access for everyone, is LSD. That is one of the two important lessons we can take from this psychedelic episode in our history, the 60s. We are, without a doubt, at the shitty end of the potential spectrum. Every Tom, Dick, and Mary got to travel the rest of the spectrum, and they took good notes, and that is what we learned. We don't have to be on the bus to understand this. We only have to visit any reasonably well-stocked library or bookstore and take an hour to see it for ourselves. There are higher ranges of consciousness open to us, and from there, the narrow range in which we live and die barely registers as consciousness at all. My assistants and proofreaders warn me that people don't like to hear themselves portrayed so negatively. That surprises me. I would think that most folks, if they took a minute to sit down and really think about it, would blubber in joyous relief to find out that what they've been calling life was really just the most meager level of subsistence, and that there were infinitudes more to this whole thing than they'd been led to believe. Just to give you the merest idea, think of all the time and effort and energy you put into projecting yourself into the world, into playing your role, into being you. Then, once you have some appreciation for what's involved, imagine not doing it anymore. Imagine if you could stop being you and just be. That's kind of a sideways way of saying something really central to this whole subject. How would your life be different if you didn't have to keep conjuring yourself into existence every moment and just exist? And on the other side of this coin, there's your obligation to reflect others back to them, as they reflect you back to you. What if you broke this social compact of mutual ego assurance? What if you could just drop these two all-consuming activities? What if you withdrew all energy from the fictional character you play? And now, what if everyone did it? what then? The point Frank sought to impress upon me again and again, the point that he seemed to find most incomprehensible, most galling, was that those higher ranges of consciousness being denied to us are the very essence of who and what we are. They are our infinite and unbounded selves, and they are closed off to us at the very moment in history when they first became open to us. That's all any of this is about, he'd often repeat. Every culture in history has had their method of accessing the great within, but it was always restricted to the few, the elite, renunciates, shamans, and the like. But now, for the first time ever, we have it in our power to make it freely and easily available to everyone. Everyone. The most important event in the history of man. And what happens? The whole world rises up against it, leaving us with the crop of methods we currently have, methods that Maya doesn't bother clamping down on because they pose no threat, that are, in fact, so ineffectual for their stated usage, and so perfectly suited to the perpetuation of delusion, that we can know without doubt from whose lineage they come down to us. Which brings us to the more important lesson the 60s have to offer. Maya. As impressive as we see she is when we bother to look, we are only seeing her at her most relaxed state. Facing no serious threats, she operates at only a minimal readiness level. She's like a sleeping giant who can do her job without being any more alert than those over whom she watches. But when an escape attempt is launched that has the potential to set the captives free in any serious numbers, an event we've only seen once, then the attentive observer is rewarded with a glimpse of what Maya is really capable. A very impressive sight. Bringing perhaps only a fraction of her offensive might to bear, she slammed the door shut, sealed it tight, plastered it out of visible existence, and labeled the area radioactively contaminated so the herd steers well clear, effectively turning humanity rabidly against the only thing that might, with a straight face, be called a practicable road to salvation. LSD provided the one and only serious offensive assault against Maya, and without much fuss or bother, she rose to the challenge and quelled the uprising, swatting it like a bug, and settling back into her light doze. She villainized, demonized, and criminalized the entheogenic class of substances so effectively that here we are now, a few decades later, and all that can really be said of mankind's one chance for liberation is that a hole in the wall was brought to the attention of the warden and promptly repaired. If I never stood up and said something, who will? We are a vanquished, broken people. We are slaves. That's how he talked sometimes. Whenever any form of government becomes destructive of these ends, he continued, lifting his glass, it is the right of the people to alter or to abolish it and to institute new government. Declaration of Independence? I asked. He nodded solemnly with a muffled belch. Revolution is the overthrow of a tyrannical oppressor. Whether individually or collectively, it is the ultimate expression of discontent. Revolutions start small and rely, perforce, on guerrilla tactics. They begin with treasonous plotters, meeting in barns and back rooms. The enemy faced by these uppity peasants consists of established governments, standing armies, courts, established order, fearful family, the press, and an intelligence apparatus capable of rooting out insurgency before it moves beyond the pitchfork and bird gun stage. Of course, when it's just a conflict between oppressed citizens and their oppressive governments, or between inmates and prison staff, that's merely the dream state shadow of the real process of revolution, the personal declaration of independence, the individual bid for freedom, the one true war of which all others are but shadows. If you were the tyrannical oppressor, it would be your job to avoid an uprising and maintain order. That's not really very difficult because we, the people, actually want to be oppressed. We just don't want it to get so uncomfortable that we'd prefer death to continued oppression. The art and science of tyrannical oppression is to bind the spirit, but not so much that death becomes preferable to continued bondage. As America's founding fathers knew, it's easy to keep people from choosing death. All experience hath shown that mankind are more disposed to suffer, while evils are sufferable, than to right themselves by abolishing the forms to which they are accustomed. U.S. Declaration of Independence. That's why the little revolution of the 60s sputtered and died. Not because Maya is invincible, but because desire is a very weak agent of change. And if we can understand why that doomed it from the start, we can also understand why any attempt to launch a personal revolution pulled by desire rather than pushed by insufferable discontent is similarly doomed. One person making a break, drawing a line. That's where the best thing in the world happens, not in groups or in societies, but in individuals.